Welcome to Rider Nation Station, presented by American Manufacturing Solutions, your total logistics partner, investing in Rider Nation Station and St. Marys, Ohio, and to our other fine sponsors. Welcome to Rider Nation Station, presented by American Manufacturing Solutions, your total logistics partner, investing in Rider Nation Station and St. Marys, Ohio, and to our other fine sponsors. What makes an individual a legend? A simple definition is they are very famous and admired by a lot of people. Legend is also defined as a story that people talk about concerning an individual well into posterity. St. Marys, Ohio has lots of legends, and some of our youth will become legendary, and those not yet born will become legendary. Today, we are going to discuss an educator who I know little about, but I believe he is a legend because former students still speak in reverence about this individual. To a certain older demographic, this person is very famous, and he is still admired by a lot of St. Marians. My only recollection of this legend is as a small child attending St. Paul's United Church of Christ, and I remember the man they called Prof and his wife sitting in the cubbies in the back of the sanctuary. A man called Prof? That sticks with a youngster. What kind of name is Prof? Why would people call him Prof? Well, I don't have the answers about who this teaching legend was, but tonight's guest, a 1962 Memorial High School graduate, is here to provide her memories of the man they called Prof. With me is Mary Dine Wilson. Mary, thanks for being Rider Nation's guest.
Glad to be here.
So, Prof was not a native St. Marian.
Oh, he was a native St. Marian.
He was a native St. Marian.
He was born here.
Already, I'm learning something right out of the gate.
I knew, because I thought he was not a native either. But his dad was a pastor here, probably in your home church. And that's how he got
So
here.
as a preacher's kid, he got relocated and relocated to Iowa?
Iowa. And that's where his next assignment was.
And he graduates from a school in Iowa?
He graduated from Alleman, Iowa High School in 1922. So he's a little bit older than you and I.
And you know, something that I was amazed, I thought that he started in the mid-40s as I was talking to my Uncle Jim Beckett about Prof, and I thought that Jim had him as a first or second year teacher. And then when I was doing some research, I found that he actually started in St. Mary's in 1930.
That's correct.
So he graduates from high school in Iowa, and then where does his educational path take
He went
him?
to the University of Wisconsin and got his undergrad.
Okay.
And came back to St. Mary's in 1930 and started teaching here.
But he wasn't done continuing his education once he arrived back
No.
to St. Mary's.
He ended up getting a master's in the arts from the University of Nebraska, which I still don't know the connection there. But he did that 1942. He got his master's.
So it'd be interesting, did he go to Nebraska, or was it a correspondence course? And one thing I know, it wasn't an online course.
No, we can be sure of that.
Yes. So he's a well-educated man.
Absolutely.
And his degrees are in English?
Yes, social studies and English.
Social studies and English. Okay. As a student, do you remember him talking about his alma maters at all?
No.
Okay.
No. He never got into his personal life at all. It was like there was a fence. It was all part of that personal dignity that I always felt that he had. He had his boundaries, and that's how he kept his privacy, I think.
Okay.
That's my guess.
Yep. So he comes back to St. Mary's in 1930. So I now know that he had a initial connection because he was born and raised here for some time.
Exactly.
So he's drawn back to St. Mary's like many people are.
He still had a brother here. He had a brother, Paul, who stayed when the rest of the family, he was older.
Okay.
And he stayed here and taught mathematics in the school system. It didn't say whether it was high school level or elementary.
Okay.
But that was the connection. So he had somebody to come back to.
Do you remember, or did you find anything else about any of his other family members?
Actually, he had 5 sisters and 3 brothers. And they all ended up back basically in this community area, which I thought fascinating. Says a lot for the good feeling that I have about being
St.
here.
Mary's.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Hometown.
Yep, because they were pulled away.
Yes. And he was the youngest, so they were all older. Paul ended up having an accident with a hunting rifle, and that ended his life. But then some of the rest of the family came back and filled out the family in the area.
Okay. What about Prof's wife? Do you have any recollections of her?
Oh, I do. And again, another person with that innate dignity that you like to see in people who are in leadership positions. She worked as a secretary for the Weston Paper Mill for a long time, and then somehow her secretarial skills were great enough that she became the secretary of the Board of Education for the city of St. Mary's. And I think she and Prof were married in, I want to say 1940.
Okay.
And set up housekeeping here. So they were both working, and it was a great situation for the two.
And what was her name?
Oh, gosh. When you said that.
It's Mrs. Kohler.
Yep, it was to me.
Yeah.
At the time. Beulah Miller. And, of course, then she became Beulah Kohler.
All righty. So let's get into the classroom for Prof. What was his teaching style like?
Just laid back. You never felt pressure. Well, I shouldn't say that. He had a thing about spelling. And if you wrote a paper, you could go from an A to an F if you had 3 misspelled words.
Oh.
You lost the letter grade. You went from an A to a B. If you had 1 misspelled word, you went from a B to a C if you had 2, and you failed the paper if you had 3 misspelled words. That was a great lesson for me, and I'm one of the lucky people who is a speller.
Right.
Some of the smartest people in my class were not spellers, and they had a lot of learning to do in Prof Kohler's class.
They got deeply involved with Webster's dictionary to make certain they had
after
everything.
The first paper that they turned in.
It only takes one time to learn that
That's
lesson.
exactly right.
Did he have a sense of humor?
He did, but it was laid back. It was subtle. You wouldn't have heard him tell a joke. In my opinion, his most important attribute was the fact that he was the vice principal, so he dealt with attendance, disciplinary issues, and he treated every student equally. And I am not kidding you. Your status meant nothing to him. Your behavior meant something, but he was glad to teach you how to get better. And that was the secret with him. His confidentiality was tight. You didn't have to worry about a leak of any of your personal information if you walked on the wild side for a period of time with Prof. You served your discipline, and then you were right back in equal to everybody else. I loved that about him. And that was a lesson I think I've carried with me all my life.
Mm-hmm. So you graduate in 1962. When did you have him for English?
As a junior.
As a junior. And was he just teaching, or was he serving a dual role of teacher and vice principal?
He served a dual role for 35 years. He was the vice principal. He taught several classes. I only ever had him once. He just was very, very, very integral part of the school system. He was the first president of the Teachers Association when they finally got around to establishing that. And that probably happened somewhere in those early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
He taught my dad when my dad was in school. Crazy.
Right.
He was there a long time.
And you had mentioned that he utilized nicknames in the classroom or in the hallway or
In
everywhere.
the classroom. He had so many names to know because he was intimately knowledgeable about most students. And he gave me my dad's nickname, which was Willie, because his name was William. And so I was Willie when I was in his class. It was just easier for him because he could connect to my dad and me in the same one-word syllable.
Right, right. And my Uncle Jim Beckett had told me that he would have been a student in the mid-40s, that Prof called him Becky. And I immediately went, Becky? For Beckett. I'm like, that makes sense.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. So, and I think a lot of teachers will utilize nicknames for students.
I agree. I think it's easier.
When I taught, I remember one student, I had to ask this past fall, I'm like, Fish, I don't even know your first name because I've called you Fish since day one. And so Prof obviously utilized that interpersonal communication with his students as well.
He did.
So looking at pictures of him, he is a man of dignity, but he also looks like a man of force. That looks like a big-statured individual in the pictures. Were students scared of him? Did they recognize him as a gentle giant?
I think you would be right to be concerned if you were on the wrong side of the disciplinary measure with him. He was firm, but it was always done. Dignity is the only word I can come up with. He gave you dignity, and he had his own personal dignity, and he just carried that through. If he spoke to you in regard to something you needed correction on, you paid attention. But you were immediately back in the loop with him because he didn't hold that against you. I love that about him.
That's awesome.
We all should be that way.
Right.
Doesn't always work that way.
So you've utilized dignity many times in the short interview thus far. So, respect. Mm-hmm. It was a two-way street is what I'm gathering.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it was earned both ways.
Absolutely. And he did not hold a sin against you. And I use that term loosely. Mm-hmm. He forgave you. He punished you. He forgave you. And he moved on. And he never pulled that up against you again. Amazing. Everybody should be like that.
That is a great quality to be
well, especially
possessed by
if you're
all.
the vice principal.
Yeah. So you find out in sometime in the summer, right before school, your schedule, and maybe he was the only junior English teacher.
At that time, I would say that's probably true.
So you just knew going in that you were going to have Prof, and word travels from one class to the next class to the next class, and that was perceived as a good thing that you're going to have Prof for English.
Well, for me it was, and I've never been afraid of English. So I had a good background, and so I was happy with that. I never had a nickname. I was one of 9 Marys in my class at Holy Rosary. So some people were Mary Elizabeth. I was just straight up Mary. I kind of liked Willie. That was a little looser, a little freer. I liked it.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Did students dare act up in his class?
Never would think of it. Never wanted to. First of all, we were college prep, so we had intentions of a good grade. And I think of Milt Mandros, who was in my class, who was far above me in the grading scale in every class I was ever in, especially the math. But he didn't get the spelling. There are people born who can't spell. Mm-hmm. It amazes me. And you can drill them and drill them and drill them, and it's still, I can't spell. I think Milt might have been one of those people. And he tried to talk Prof out of a bad grade.
Didn't work.
Not working for him.
Was he heavy on the homework and the assignments?
He was not. He was demanding about what he did assign. And his quizzes, he did a pop quiz thing. It was basically fun stuff. But I believe he was trying to lead us into the bigger part of the world outside of Little St. Mary's, Ohio. So some of his questions were unbeknown. What is flotsam and jetsam? Kids looked at him like, what is this? You know, he wanted you to think outside the box. He was the first teacher that I can honestly say ever taught me to think for myself. It wasn't a matter of learning something by rote.
Right. So he put a good blend of, obviously, certain things have to be done through rote memorization.
Well, yes.
But then,
by your junior year in high school, you're kind of past that.
Then intertwined with the critical thinking skills
exactly.
that we dearly need our students today and tomorrow to possess. Excellent. We kind of touched on this question already. Was he there for the students, or was he just there to teach? And obviously, I think we've got that drilled out there. And you also kind of touched on this one as well. Did he sense when a student was having a non-academic hardship, and was he there to pull them aside and say, you know, how can I help? Or you need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get moving here.
He would take him into his little, do you remember that little cubby hole that was his office? Right in the center of the, right in the
top
center.
floor, in between the doors and to the auditorium and the balcony.
Pull somebody in there, pull them, changing classes, pull them out of there. You know how rumor travels in a high school, and he would know that stuff.
Yeah.
He'd pull them in, close the door, have his chat, and everybody was better off when he was finished. Did you know he was the athletic director as well?
I read that.
Yeah. Not considered, I don't think officially, but he did all the functions that an AD does now.
And this is a man who put 43 years of his blood, sweat, and tears into bettering the youth of St. Mary's. Starts in 1930 and retires in June of 1973.
Yep.
That's impressive.
And he never looked for accolades, medals, public recognition, his picture in the paper. That wasn't part of, he did it because that's what he wanted to do. And again, I say to you, that goes back to having a father who was a pastor, having that good background as a child. And I think all 9 of them were that way.
Yeah. How neat. I also found in a 1930 yearbook that, which was his first year, so the 31 yearbook probably, that he was also a co-advisor of the debate club.
He was? No, I didn't know that.
And did he, in his English classes, did he do any type of debating?
Well, he often did. He would challenge us.
Yeah.
And then he would pull somebody else up and say, you take the opposite. I did not know that. You take the opposite side of that discussion, and we would just have a quick... As a matter of fact, because of that, I went on to be on the debate team at Bowling Green when I went to Bowling Green. And we traveled, you know, that little college circuit that we...
Yeah, I didn't dig in far enough to find out how long he was involved with the debate team, but definitely in that 31 yearbook, he was listed as a co-advisor for...
I never knew that.
Yep. Well, I finally got to teach you something about Prof Kohler.
Yes, you did.
All righty, we're going to take a commercial break and thank our sponsors for helping make Rider Nation Station happen. And when we come back, it's going to be This Day in History.
This segment of tonight's broadcast has been brought to you by Minster Bank, helping people achieve financial success in support of the Rider Nation and the St. Mary's community. The Evening Leader, chronicling the history of St. Mary's for over 100 years. And like a good neighbor, Lori Yelton, your local State Farm agent, is there.
This Day in History brought to you by our fine sponsors. Please stop in to see these fine folks and stay local the best you can. Tell them thanks for supporting Writer Nation Station. Well, 1962 is the year that we're digging into the evening leader because that's the year that Mary graduated, or Willie.
Yes, there you go.
And April 23rd, 1962 wasn't really that riveting of a news day, Mary, but here's a couple of things that I did find of interest. April 30th is deadline for city income tax. Tax return for the 1961 year must be filed by April 30th with R.G. Orfel, the city tax commissioner. Does that name ring a bell at all?
Yeah, sure does.
Guy Lombardo and his orchestra will perform May 6th at the Crystal Ballroom in Versailles. Did you ever go to the Crystal Ball?
No, I worked under a strict disciplinary measure by my father, the original Willie.
Ironically, I have been to the Crystal Ballroom.
Really?
I think it had burnt down and they maybe
Yes.
rebuilt it. And then Guy Lombardo, I had to do a quick search to see if this was somebody that was famous or legendary.
He was big.
He was. I was surprised. And he had a CBS show in the 50s
Yep.
as well. So how neat that he was in Versailles. Advertisement time. Logan Furniture announces 1 week only. Buy your Maytag automatic washing machine for $188 and your Maytag dryer for $138. And finally, absentee disabled voter ballots. They're now available from R.J. Burke, Assistant Clerk of the County Board of Elections at the Burke Insurance Agency. The ballots must be returned to the Board of Elections by Friday noon, May 4th, to be counted in the May election, primary election, May 8th. This Day in History sponsors. Thank you to the following sponsors for helping to bring This Day in History: Laura Yelton State Farm, Minster Bank, and of course, the Evening Leader. Every student has that moment or one lesson that they remember from a teacher. For instance, for me, I'll never forget dissecting cow's lungs in Mr. Elking's 6th grade class. I think we even took straws and made the lungs inflate.
Really?
I'll never forget that. Mrs. Shelby's poetry unit, and Mr. Long's 9th grade reading of Great Expectations, as well as his manners lesson. Mary, what's one memorable lesson or moment from Prof other than don't misspell something on your paper?
Well, that's the biggie. And again, I think I have to go back to the way he treated people. That was a lesson that has stayed with me to this day. And if you can discipline somebody, speak harshly to them, offer them some kind of corrective measure, and then come back and put them on an equal level again, it doesn't get any better than that as far as character is concerned, in my opinion. That I'd have to say that was my lesson from Prof.
Excellent, excellent. Run us through the best that you can. I know 1962 has been a few years removed from 2019, but if you can, run us through what a typical class period would have been like with Prof. From the bell rings to the bell ringing again that class is over. I mean, were you allowed to mill around, be in your seat, and it's getting started as soon as...
And you were happy to be there. And he would begin whatever his lecture was for that day. Then there would always be some sort of question and answer period, maybe even a quiz on the information that he'd given you the day before or just that day. And then he would allow discussion period, which that's where you do your most remembering, is when you get to back and forth with somebody on that kind of thing. And that's how it quickly would go. He didn't have disciplinary problems in class. Nobody was gonna fight with him or argue with him. Of course, in 1962, there wasn't a lot of that to begin with. We were well-disciplined people. Maybe it was fright, I don't know, but
Yeah.
we just didn't goof around in class as a general rule. And we had long class periods. We were probably as close to a 1-hour class period as you can get in 62. I don't know what it is now, but I'm thinking it's a lot less than that because they have so many more classes.
Yeah, there are more classes. I remember when I was in high school and then also teaching, it was 53-minute periods, maybe a 7-period day, 6-period day at that point in time.
Yeah,
But,
well, that's close enough. Yeah, start, finish.
Yep. And so you've mentioned the quizzes. You gave a couple of examples. His assessment, whether or not you're mastering the concepts that he's trying to convey as a teacher. The quizzes, was it pretty writing intensive? Did you have a lot of papers for Prof?
We had some. There were always like maybe 4 in a year. And I want to say quarterly, but I know that can't be right because that's now how our years were divided up. But he wanted us to be productive. And he wanted to see us improve from that first paper to the last paper. So I think there were probably at least 4.
Okay.
And a multitude of quizzes in the meantime.
Was it all composition or was it literature intertwined with it as well?
Yes, both ways.
Okay.
But it was basically he was checking, and I think some of those quizzes were the same thing. He was checking to see how much you read, if you ever got to a newspaper, because a lot of those questions came out of newspapers. He wanted to know who you were and what you were capable of, and that may have had something to do with how he based his next teaching effort.
Perhaps you had a quiz question as to where Guy Lombardo was going to be performing.
Maybe. Although that was by the 60s. We had moved on to Elvis Presley, you know.
Yeah. So in that 1931 mirror, I found a little blurb about Prof Kohler, and listen, and to the viewers, listen, especially those that have had Prof Kohler, and see if that first class was spot on about this man.
Okay.
One of our new teachers is Mr. Kohler, and we believe he has carved a niche for himself in the thoughts of Memorial's students. A good sport, agreeable, and a friend to all. We are sure he will do great things in the future.
I think it's spot on.
His first year of teaching, and it really does echo a lot, Mary, of what you have conveyed so far.
I think much more dignified as he got older. Age will tend to do that. I think he was 56 when I had him, and maybe 67 when he retired, so he was probably ready to be dignified by then.
Yeah. You got ahead of me in a good way about, did I know that he was an athletic director?
Oh.
And so this man serves 43 years, an educator, an assistant principal, in charge of attendance, is in charge of athletics. We found out that he was an advisor to the debate club. He really was a man who was all things to Memorial High School.
He was.
And, again, I look at that picture of him that I found in the file, and to me, it was like, I don't want to mess with that guy. I don't want to get on his wrong side. But do you recall at all, did you work for him at all in the assistant principal's office?
I did.
And was he a man of humor in there, or was he just as he was in the classroom as he was in
He was easygoing.
Okay.
I've never heard him tell a joke or exercise humor in that way. He had to be the boss because of the disciplinary side of it. Mm-hmm. But he was good to us. We wanted to be there. We wanted to work for him. Loved that job. And I had 2 other people working with me. I believe we worked first period, went around and pulled those attendance notes off the nail outside the door, and did the addition, and then took the main report downstairs. And he was easy to work for, and we were good at what we did.
So that dovetails into the next question. You had mentioned to me earlier in an email that Prof was a fun guy in 1930 to 1973 terms. What do you mean by that?
Just that dignity thing. That's got to be the number one word I think of when I think of him. He had a personal dignity, and he didn't step outside of that. You didn't step over that line either. And if you did, and the three of us in the office did one day, we made fun of an excuse given for an absence. And I had a note from both Chuck and Diane, who were working with me at that time, and they both said, "Oh, remember when he scolded us?" And I said, "Yes, I do." But it was the same for us as it was for the most discipline he had to give to anyone else. It was over with, and he moved on, and that was that. It never came up again. He yanked our chain just a little bit, got us back in line.
Yep. Before I go into a hypothetical about Prof, there were some other legendary teachers at Memorial High School. Do you want to shed any light to us about who some of those may have been?
Emil Steva.
Latin?
He taught Latin. I had him for English as a sophomore, and some generalized testing that we had to do on a regular basis. He was another teacher who, there were boundaries, dignified, but you knew how smart he was, and you knew you didn't want to mess with him. Did you know he was a boxer?
I did not know that.
He was a boxer.
And to go back to Prof Kohler, I didn't verify this, but John Andreoni had mentioned that he was almost a professional football player in an organization that later became known as the Green Bay Packers.
Well, that
football
fits.
Player, boxer.
Sure. And Emil Steva also played the piano like a pro. He would give concerts at the high school for the students. He was amazing. And he was married to Anli Hip, who was a typing teacher. Now, we're talking about all three of these people, high margins of discipline, high margins of dignity. You didn't step into their personal business or activities. You knew where you stood with them, but we liked them, all three of them, so much. Got to say something for personal dignity and discipline.
Absolutely. Let's dive into this hypothetical question.
Okay, hit me.
How would Prof do today in the classroom? Or better yet, how would students do today if Prof had them in the classroom?
That's the question that came to my mind when you say that. I think he would have had to adapt a little bit. If you think about it, everything is looser today. Mm-hmm. The lines are a little more blurred.
Sure.
And he probably did some of that as he went from 1930 to 1973. I don't know now how he would have handled some of the outright, blatant non-acceptance of discipline or behavior norms. I think maybe behavior norms are by the wayside. Could I be right?
You could be.
It's something to think about.
Yeah.
It was different back in the day. Of course, I think people get tired of hearing us talk about back in the day. But
every generation does that.
Well, yes, that's my dad did. But you knew what you could do and what you couldn't do. And as a general rule, students didn't step over that boundary. I think he'd have to figure out today a different way to run his ship.
Right.
Yeah, a little softer.
And again, not knowing him other than what I mentioned earlier I just knew that was Prof Kohler, and Prof, what a funny name for a little kid. But I'm certain that 1931 yearbook, when the kids are identifying who this new teacher is, would probably still apply to this hypothetical that he is a good sport, agreeable, and a friend to all.
I think
just
you're right.
from what you've conveyed to me about
He
about
just
Prof.
had that knack. And I think he cared. He cared about me. He would have cared about you. He just had a way about him. He liked what he was born to be a teacher. That's my opinion. Born to be a teacher, and he was a great one.
Well, that's our story on Prof. Kohler, and any of you who are watching and have any other stories, comments, just please let us know on Facebook or in the YouTube comment section, or send us an email to writernationstation@gmail.com. We would love to hear those stories. Any last thoughts on Prof before we...
If you find out why they call him Prof, I want to know.
That's our plea to those that are watching in Writer Nation Station. We've not been able to figure that out. Where did he receive the moniker Prof?
It'd be fun to know.
It really would be. All righty, we're going to take a second sponsorship break, and when we return, it's time for Writer Nation Station Word Activity.
I can hardly wait.
Awesome. We'll be right back.
This segment of Writer Nation Station has been brought to you by Albert Sporting Goods at 121 West Spring Street, serving the St. Mary's community since 1980. Plus One Professionals Real Estate, selling St. Mary's from the corner of Spring and Chestnut since 1982.
Thank you to our fine sponsors for bringing Writer Nation Station's Word Association, Plus One Professionals, and Albert Sporting Goods. Please stop in to see these fine folks, stay local the best you can, and tell them thanks for supporting Writer Nation Station. So here's how it goes. I'm going to flash a word up on the screen and give me the first thing that comes to your mind. You can elaborate if you would like, or you can just give me the first thing that comes to your mind. And if you just don't know, just say pass.
Okay.
All righty, the first one, the St. Mary's Foundry.
Oh, gosh, I think of my dad and my grandpa. Both of them spent their lives there. My granddad still has some patents on producing castings that have not been made any different than they were back when he started in 1916.
Wow. And what's neat, 2019,
Yeah.
St. Mary's Foundry is still going.
Going strong.
Yep, that's awesome. All righty, the bungalow.
Oh, gosh, every day. That's the answer. The bungalow?
Every day.
Every day. After school, we would just all go there. A suicide, do you know what a suicide is? And for anybody who's listening who doesn't know, a suicide is one shot of every flavor off of the bungalow soda counter, and then a little fizz and a straw, and it cost a nickel. You can't get that today.
My first suicides were out at KC Geiger Park when we got done winning a ball game, and the coaches bought drinks for everybody on the team. And I heard a kid say, "I want a suicide," and I watched them tap each drink.
Really?
And that's the first time I ever had a suicide.
Really?
Yep.
Well,
So it was passed on from the bungalow to KC Geiger Concessions.
that's wonderful.
And the next word association, the Rathskeller.
Oh, gosh. First time I ever went to the Rathskeller was on Christmas Eve, and it was so that Santa could come at the house. But we lived across the street from Fred and Annabelle Cook, and Fred was working that night. So Dad took all three of us. My sister was a baby, but the three older kids went down the Rathskeller, and we had a Coke with a cherry in it. It was the best day ever, and that allowed my mom a chance to play Santa Claus and set everything up. And that was actually that was the only time I was ever in the Rathskeller.
Oh, really?
Yeah. On Christmas Eve.
I think that's going to be a topic sometime on Writer Nation
Oh, it
Station.
should be.
Got to find the right person who can.
Yes, you do.
That can really convey the story, and I think that will be a really neat one. And finally, the glass block.
Oh, all I can think of is that it's gone. It was always there. And if you went down in the basement, Larry worked there. It was Murphy's at the time, and he was the slave labor.
Yeah.
And he said his favorite part was being able to look out the window and see the water from the tumbles of the woolen mill, which fell right outside those windows of the glass block building.
Neat.
Yeah. And that was fun for all of us.
Definitely. I have, my memories are John's furniture store was located there, and riding the cargo elevator.
Sure.
That's the memory I have as a youngster, getting to go in with my mom. All righty, you didn't have to say pass.
I didn't.
Excellent job. Again, thank you to our fine sponsors for bringing Rider Nation Station's Word Association, Plus One Professionals, and Albert Sporting Goods. It's time for interactive correspondence, and we've got a couple correspondences from our show with John Andreoni talking about living on Spring Street. The first one from Sharon Likens. I loved Grandma Andreoni. The peanuts were great. Do you remember the peanuts?
I do.
And from Ann Morris, fascinating episode. I remember delivering Dayton Daily newspapers to Andreoni's store very early on Sunday mornings and getting a confectionery treat from Mrs. Andreoni, and also being challenged by Mr. Andreoni in language arts classes a few years later.
Oh, sure.
And this is going to fall under interactive correspondence. It's a letter to the editor that I happened to come across in a file that I found on Prof Kohler. It's dated April 20th, 1972, and I do not know the author of this letter to the editor. Dear editor, I probably shouldn't be taking space in your paper for my sentimental ramblings, but I want to express what I've been thinking for a long time. I want to thank several people who, to me, have been very important and are most deserving of my gratitude. Now that I've decided to write this letter, I find it very difficult to put my thoughts into words. I hope that there are many of you who have the same thoughts and feelings, and that the rest of you will bear with me while I tell you how I feel. While on my way to work at the Union Hall this morning, I happened to see Professor Kohler, and one of my teachers in 1951 and 52. Prof, as we all called him, was most instrumental in guiding me to the right path and to a life that has been more than satisfactory and rewarding to me and my family. It is seldom that we give consideration to the problems that our teachers and instructors must have had in accomplishing what they many times must have thought to be an almost impossible and frustrating task. Thoughts like these come to us as we mature and have lived through some of our own problems and shared in some with friends and family. Then we realize and appreciate all they have done to help us grow up. Continuing on, as we come closer to our middle years, all of a sudden we are amazed at how fast time has passed. It doesn't seem possible but that this year will mark a 20-year anniversary for me. I am proud that I graduated from Memorial High in 1952, and here it is 1972, and my older son, Steve, will be graduating from Memorial. What more can a man ask than to know that his children can and will attend a fine school such as Memorial? Today, as I reminisce on my school days, I can remember Prof Kohler for being kind and for understanding me. But then I can remember him badgering me and telling me to get to work and to think and to study harder. His reasoning was that I would need to learn these fundamentals to make a better life for myself, unless, of course, I wanted to be a little more than a bum. And I, knowing everything and all things at that time, didn't believe him. But oh, how I know now that what he was telling me was true and is true. Those of you who were fortunate enough to have Prof as an instructor should remember the weapon he used to awaken you if you had bad manners to fall asleep in his class, which I did on occasion. He used to strike the desk with it to rouse you and then tell you that he should have hit you on the head. The end of the letter that, again, I do not know who the author is of that.
Oh, but you could find out.
I can find out. Do you remember the stick?
No. The stick meant nothing to me.
Okay. So that was something from the 50s and earlier, presumably. Now, what I do remember is Al Minerding used a similar technique in 7th grade social studies.
Slam the desk?
He had the stick, and if you maybe fell asleep, it would ring a little bit on the desk. So, interesting story there. If you have questions, comments, want to verify a story, want to counter a story, please provide us your correspondence, either on the Facebook page, the YouTube page, or submit an email to writernationstation@gmail.com. Well, we've come to the end of our show. It is our hope at Writer Nation Station this podcast did entertain, educate, enlighten, and elevate your perspective about St. Marys, Ohio. We hope a story has been told that augments the development of relationships, old and new, to promote growth for all who do, did, and will call St. Marys, Ohio home. If you're sitting there amazed by what you just saw and asking yourself, how can I help? 4 simple suggestions. Share and share and share the Writer Nation Station YouTube channel and the Facebook page. 2, submit ideas in the comments section or the email address for future shows. 3, support our sponsors with business and kind words. 4, donate to Writer Nation Station at 07396 Lynch Road, St. Marys, Ohio 45885. Again, I want to thank Mary Wilson for her time and sharing her stories with us about the legendary educator, Prof Kohler. What fun reminiscing about one of many of MHS's legendary educators.
That's so true.
Next Tuesday, we will get an RPA update from Dan Burke and Zach Farrell about the stadium project. And I believe this will be taped from the stadium. If you haven't seen the view from the stands yet, tune in. I hope you think positively about our town, the town we did not inherit from our ancestors, but the town we borrowed from our grandchildren. Peace to you, my fellow St. Marians, always and always. Good night.
This episode of Writer Nation Station has been sponsored by American Manufacturing Solutions, your total logistic partner, investing in the St. Marys community. Albert Sporting Goods at 121 West Spring Street, serving the St. Marys community since 1980. Plus One Professionals Real Estate, selling St. Marys from the corner of Spring and Chestnut since 1982. Minster Bank, helping people achieve financial success and supporter of the Writer Nation and the St. Marys community. The Evening Leader, chronicling the history of St. Marys for over 100 years. Like a good neighbor, Lori Yelton, your local State Farm agent, is there.